I'm Ethan Parker, 30 years old, and the day I inherited my father Harold's rundown gas station instead of my siblings' valuable assets, I became the family joke. Richard got the house, Stephanie received the investment portfolio, and I got the worthless corner lot with leaking pumps. What none of us knew was that beneath that crumbling concrete lay a secret worth over $200 million. Dad knew exactly what he was doing, and when my siblings found out, I served revenge colder than they ever imagined. Before I tell you how I discovered what my father had hidden for decades, drop a comment letting me know where you're watching from, hit that like button, and subscribe to join our story-sharing community. Growing up as the youngest of 3 siblings in Riverdale, a middle-class neighborhood just outside of Portland, I always felt like I was living in the shadow of my older brother and sister. Our father, Harold Parker, was a quiet, hard-working man who had owned and operated Parker's Gas and Service for over 40 years. The modest filling station wasn't impressive by any standards, but it put food on our table and helped fund my siblings' college educations. Dad was the type of man who wore the same pair of work boots until they fell apart. He drove the same Ford pickup truck for 20 years, patching it up himself whenever something broke. Mom always said he had hands that could fix anything except a broken heart. Margaret Parker, my mother, was the emotional center of our family, balancing out Dad's stoic nature with her warmth and encouragement. When cancer took her 5 years before Dad passed, something inside him seemed to fade away too. Richard, my oldest brother, now 38, had always been the golden child of the family. He graduated from Wharton Business School and landed a job at Lancaster Investment Group, quickly climbing the corporate ladder. By 30, he was already making 7 figures and never missed an opportunity to mention it at family gatherings. His wife Jennifer came from old money, and together they lived in a gated community that required visitor passes just to enter. "Banking is where the real money is," Richard would say at Thanksgiving dinners, patting Dad on the shoulder. "Not like pumping gas and changing oil." Dad would just nod and continue eating, never one to argue. Stephanie, 35, wasn't much different. After graduating with a marketing degree, she joined Horizon Media, one of the most prestigious marketing firms on the West Coast. She married Michael, a corporate attorney, and they lived in a downtown penthouse with floor-to-ceiling windows overlooking the city. Their Christmas cards always featured them in exotic locations, skiing in the Alps one year, lounging on a private beach in Bali the next. Then there was me. After struggling through community college, I finally earned a degree in environmental science from the State University. Unlike my siblings, who seemed to have their lives planned out from birth, I bounced between jobs: park ranger, lab assistant, environmental consultant, never quite finding my footing. Dad never pressured me like he did Richard and Stephanie. Instead, he would just say, "You'll figure it out, son. Some paths take longer to find." When Dad's health began to decline, it was painfully clear that his time was limited. COPD from years of smoking in his youth, combined with heart problems, confined him to his modest home. During those final months, Richard visited twice, citing his busy schedule. Stephanie managed to stop by once a month, usually with expensive health foods Dad never touched. I moved back home to care for him. Each evening, we'd sit in his recliner while I helped him with his breathing treatments. Sometimes he'd start talking about the gas station, random stories about customers or repairs he'd made decades ago. I thought it was just nostalgia or the medication making him ramble. "That place is more than it seems, Ethan," he said one night, about a week before he passed. "Always has been. Remember that." I nodded, assuming it was just sentimentality about the business he'd built from nothing. The reading of the will took place on a rainy Tuesday in April. The 4 of us, Richard, Stephanie, their spouses, and me, gathered in the office of Dad's attorney, Gerald Hoffman. The small office smelled of leather and coffee, with certificates covering nearly every inch of wall space. "Let's begin," Gerald said, adjusting his glasses. "To my son Richard Parker, I leave the family home at 1420 Maple Drive, valued at approximately $850,000, along with its contents. Richard nodded as if he'd expected nothing less. To my daughter Stephanie Parker Wilson, I leave my investment portfolio managed by Fidelity Investments, valued at approximately $700,000. Stephanie smiled, already mentally spending her inheritance. And to my son Ethan Parker, I leave Parker's Gas and Service located at 2701 River Road, including all associated land, structures, equipment, and business assets. The room fell silent for a moment before Richard let out a snort. Dad left you the gas station? That place is falling apart. The property taxes alone will eat you alive, Richard said, not bothering to hide his amusement. Stephanie touched my arm in fake sympathy. Maybe you can sell it to a developer? There's that new shopping center going up nearby. The land might be worth something, at least. There is one final note, Gerald continued, pulling out a sealed envelope. This is to be given to Ethan privately. After the others left, Gerald handed me the envelope. Inside was a single page with Dad's familiar handwriting. Ethan, I know the others won't understand why I left you the station. They see the world through different eyes than we do. The station is more valuable than anyone knows, but it takes the right person to recognize its worth. I trust you'll figure it out. Your mother always said you were the one who inherited my patience and her heart. That combination is worth more than money. Love, Dad. Later that evening, Richard called me. Listen, I've been thinking. That gas station is going to be a burden for you. Why don't I help you find a buyer? I know some people in commercial real estate. I'm going to keep it, I said firmly. Don't be ridiculous. He laughed. What do you know about running a business? That place barely breaks even. Dad was too stubborn to sell, but you don't have to make the same mistake. Stephanie's call came the next day. Ethan, sweetie, Richard told me you're planning to keep the station. Is that true? I'm worried about you. That place will drain every penny you have. Their mockery continued over the next few weeks. At Richard's dinner party celebrating his inheritance, he introduced me to his friends as my little brother who inherited a grease pit while I got the family estate. Stephanie wasn't much better, telling her husband loudly enough for me to hear. Per Ethan always was Dad's project. I guess the junk station was his final charity. I left the party early, their laughter following me out the door. Despite my hurt and disappointment, something about Dad's note kept me going. He'd never been one to waste words, and if he thought the station was valuable, there had to be a reason. The morning after I received the keys to Parker's Gas and Service, I arrived before sunrise. The flickering neon sign cast an eerie blue glow over the cracked concrete. Two ancient pumps stood like tired sentinels under a rusting awning. The small convenience store attached to the repair garage had windows so grimy you could barely see inside. This was my inheritance. This was what Dad thought was so special. As I unlocked the front door, the familiar bell jingled, the same sound I'd heard throughout my childhood when visiting Dad at work. The interior smelled of motor oil, coffee, and the faint mustiness of a building approaching its 5th decade of existence. You must be Harold's boy. I turned to find an older man emerging from the garage area, wiping his hands on a red shop rag. His gray hair was cut military short, and his weathered face had the deep lines of someone who spent most of his life outdoors. Marcus Williams, he said, extending a hand. Worked with your dad for 15 years. Ethan Parker, I replied, shaking his hand. I didn't realize anyone was here yet. Marcus chuckled. Always get here at 5. Your dad gave me keys years ago. Coffee's already brewing in the back office. Over that first cup of coffee, Marcus filled me in on the state of the business. The station was nearly bankrupt. The underground tanks needed inspection, the pumps frequently malfunctioned, and we were losing customers to the new Shell station that had opened 2 miles down the road. Your dad refused to take loans to modernize, Marcus explained. Said he didn't believe in debt. Last few years, he was barely taking a salary, just enough to cover his medical bills. I spent that first day inspecting every inch of the property. The roof leaked in 3 places. The hydraulic lift in the garage worked only half the time. The refrigeration unit for the cold drinks hummed so loudly customers had to raise their voices to be heard at the counter. The financial records were even more depressing. Dad had been operating at a loss for the past 2 years, keeping the business afloat with his personal savings. At the current rate, we had maybe 3 months before I'd have to close down. The next day, Richard showed up in his Mercedes, parking it far from the pumps as if the car might catch something. "I brought someone to meet you," he said, gesturing to a man in an expensive suit who remained standing by the car. "This is Jackson Maxwell from Horizon Development. They're interested in the land." Maxwell approached with the confident stride of someone used to getting his way. "Mr. Parker, your brother speaks highly of this location. We're planning a mixed-use development in this area and your property would be perfect for our entrance plaza." "Not interested," I said. "We're prepared to offer $400,000. Maxwell continued as if I hadn't spoken. "Well above market value for a failing business." Richard placed a hand on my shoulder. "Be reasonable, Ethan. This is a way out." I shrugged off his hand. "The station isn't for sale." After they left, Marcus emerged from the garage. "They've been sniffing around for years. Your dad always sent them packing too." Stephanie arrived the following week, bringing lunch from an overpriced organic cafe. She walked around the store, wrinkling her nose at the dusty merchandise. "This place is worse than I remembered," she said, picking up a faded road map. "Did Dad ever update anything?" "I'm working on it," I replied, though I had no idea how I'd afford any improvements. "Look, Ethan," she said, lowering her voice to what she probably thought was a compassionate tone. "Richard told me about the offer from that developer. $400,000 could set you up nicely. You could go back to school, get a master's degree. Start fresh. I'm not selling." She sighed dramatically. "Why are you being so stubborn? Dad held on to this place out of sentimentality, but you don't have to make the same mistake." The pressure continued to mount. Richard called almost daily with updated offers from Maxwell. Stephanie sent links to job postings and apartment listings, assuming I'd eventually give in. Their spouses joined the campaign, with Jennifer suggesting I stop being stubborn and admit defeat, and Michael offering to review any sales contracts pro bono, as a family courtesy. Through it all, I kept thinking about Dad's note. The station was more valuable than anyone knows. What did that mean? Had he hidden money somewhere? Was there something about the property I was missing? One evening, after closing, I decided to thoroughly explore Dad's office. It was a small room behind the checkout counter, barely big enough for a desk and filing cabinet. Everything was exactly as he'd left it: coffee mug with a fishing joke, calendar still turned to the month he'd fallen ill, framed photo of Mom on the desk. The bottom drawer of his desk contained decades of paperwork, tax returns, equipment manuals, employee records. Beneath it all was a folder labeled Property Records. Inside, I found the original deed from when Dad purchased the station in 1979, along with surveys and plot maps. Something about the property boundaries caught my attention. According to the most recent survey, completed just 3 years ago, the station sat on 3.8 acres, but the original purchase showed only 2.5 acres. Had Dad acquired additional land over the years? If so, why wasn't there any record of it? In the corner of the office stood an old metal filing cabinet. The top 2 drawers contained invoices and receipts, but the bottom drawer was locked. I searched through Dad's desk for a key but found nothing. That night, sitting alone in Dad's office with only the buzz of the fluorescent lights for company, I felt closer to him than I had since his passing. "What were you trying to tell me, Dad?" I whispered to the empty room. "What am I missing?" The answer would come sooner than I expected, and it would change everything. 3 weeks after taking over the gas station, I was working late, trying to make sense of Dad's chaotic bookkeeping system. The clock on the wall read 11:30 p.m. when I accidentally knocked over his old coffee mug, sending pens scattering across the floor. As I gathered them up, I noticed something shiny behind the desk. It was a small silver key that had fallen through a gap between the desk and the wall. The key was attached to a faded leather tab with BD burned into it, my father's initials, Bernard Harold Davis Parker. My heart racing, I tried the key in the locked filing cabinet drawer. It fit perfectly, turning with a satisfying click. Inside was a single thick folder labeled Land Survey Confidential. The folder contained dozens of documents, geological surveys, land reports, correspondence with environmental consulting firms, and several maps with handwritten notes in my father's neat script. Most of the papers were dated between 5 and 15 years ago. The first document was a letter from Roberts Environmental Consulting, dated 12 years earlier. Dear Mr. Parker, as requested, we have completed the preliminary geological assessment of your property. Our findings confirm the presence of significant natural gas deposits approximately 800 to 1,200 feet beneath the surface of your land. The estimated volume, based on our initial tests, suggests a reserve value of between $75 to $100 million at current market rates. As discussed, these findings are strictly confidential. Please contact us to discuss next steps regarding verification and potential extraction options. I stared at the paper in disbelief. Natural gas? Under the gas station? Was this some kind of joke? Further in the folder, I found more recent assessments from other firms, each confirming and expanding on the initial findings. The most recent report, dated just 14 months ago, estimated the value at nearly $200 million with modern extraction techniques. There was also correspondence with various government officials about mineral rights and land use regulations, all indicating that Dad had been meticulously researching and protecting his discovery for years without ever moving to capitalize on it. My hands shook as I spread the documents across the desk. This explained everything: why Dad had refused all offers for the property, why he had been so insistent that I specifically inherit the station, why he had written that cryptic note. I was sitting on a gold mine. Or rather, a gas mine. That night I barely slept. My mind raced with questions. Why hadn't Dad told anyone? Why hadn't he sold or developed the resource himself? What was I supposed to do with this information? The next morning, I called the most recent consulting firm mentioned in the documents, Westlake Environmental. I asked to speak with Laura Jennings, the geologist who had signed the final report. Mr. Parker, Laura said when we met at the station 2 days later. She was a professional-looking woman in her 40s with practical clothes and a no-nonsense demeanor. I was sorry to hear about your father's passing. He was a fascinating man to work with. So the reports are real? I asked. There's actually natural gas under this property? Laura nodded, pulling out her tablet to show me 3D imaging of the underground formations. Not just real, but exceptional. The deposit is unusually accessible and contained within the boundaries of your property. With the advancements in extraction technology over the past decade, it's now possible to access these reserves with minimal environmental impact. But why didn't my father do anything about it? He struggled financially toward the end. Laura's expression softened. Your father was concerned about several things. First, he wanted to ensure any extraction would be done responsibly, without damaging the surrounding ecosystem. The technology has only recently advanced to meet his standards. Second, there were regulatory hurdles he was working through. And third, she hesitated. And third, he said he was waiting for the right person to take over. He mentioned his children several times, saying only one would understand the true value of what lay beneath the surface. That evening, I found a hidden compartment in Dad's desk containing a personal journal. The entries stretched back years, but I turned immediately to the most recent pages. April 3rd, another offer from Maxwell today, through Richard again. Richard doesn't understand why I won't sell a worthless piece of land. I've never told him or Stephanie about what lies beneath. Money has always been their measuring stick, and I fear what they would do with this knowledge. They would sell to the highest bidder without concern for consequences. Ethan visited today, brought dinner and sat with me through the worst of the coughing fits. He talked about his latest environmental project, passionate about protecting the wetlands just as Margaret always was about her garden. He has her heart and my stubborn patience. He will understand that wealth comes with responsibility. The doctors say I don't have much time left. I've made my decision. Richard and Stephanie will receive conventional inheritances that will satisfy their material desires. Ethan will receive the station, and with it, the chance to make a difference. His environmental background makes him uniquely qualified to handle what comes next. I trust he will discover the truth when he's ready and make wiser choices than I might have in my younger days. Tears streamed down my face as I read my father's words. He hadn't given me the worthless inheritance as my siblings believed. He had entrusted me with something precious, something he believed only I would manage responsibly. For the first time since his death, I felt a profound connection to my father, not just as his son, but as someone he had truly seen and understood. In his own quiet way, he had been preparing me for this moment my entire life. But my moment of revelation wouldn't remain private for long. Someone had been watching the station, noting Laura's visit and my changed behavior. Within days, my siblings would discover the truth, and our family conflict would reach heights I never imagined possible. The call from Richard came exactly 3 days after Laura's visit. His tone was different, overly casual in a way that immediately put me on alert. "Ethan, I've been thinking," he said. "Maybe I was too quick to dismiss Dad's gas station. How about I come by tomorrow? We could talk about potential business opportunities." "What business opportunities?" I asked, though I had a sinking feeling I already knew. "Oh, you know, just some ideas I've been kicking around. Stephanie will join us too. Family meeting, like old times." They arrived the next morning in separate cars but at the same time, clearly planned. Richard wore what he called his casual business attire, which still cost more than my entire wardrobe. Stephanie brought expensive coffee and pastries from a downtown bakery. "Little brother!" Richard boomed as they entered the store. "Place is looking exactly the same, actually." He laughed too loudly while scanning the property with new interest. Stephanie handed me a coffee. "We thought we should check in, see how you're doing with your inheritance." The way she emphasized the last word made it clear something had changed. I led them to the small break room behind the garage. "What's this really about?" They exchanged glances before Richard leaned forward. "We've heard some interesting rumors, Ethan. Something about geological consultants visiting the property? Natural resources beneath the surface?" My blood ran cold. "Where did you hear that?" "Small town people talk," Richard shrugged. "Is it true? Did Dad know there was natural gas under this place?" There was no point denying it. "Yes, it's true." The transformation was instant. Stephanie's patronizing smile vanished, replaced by intensity. "And you weren't going to tell us? Your own family?" "I just found out myself," I said. "I'm still processing what it means." Richard waved that away. "What it means is that this inheritance should have been shared equally among all of us. Dad clearly wasn't thinking straight near the end. He knew exactly what he was doing," I countered. "He left detailed explanations." "What explanations?" Stephanie demanded. I wasn't about to share Dad's journal with them. "He had his reasons." Richard's fake friendliness disappeared completely. "Listen, Ethan. This changes everything. We're talking about millions of dollars. As the oldest, I think I should take the lead on developing this opportunity. We'll bring in experts, negotiate with energy companies." "No," I cut him off. "Dad left the station to me. The decision about what happens next is mine alone." "Don't be ridiculous," Stephanie snapped. "You don't have the experience or connections to handle something like this. This is family money we're talking about." "Family money?" I laughed bitterly. 2 weeks ago, this was a worthless grease pit you couldn't wait for me to unload. Now suddenly it's family money? The meeting devolved from there. Richard threatened legal action to contest the will. Stephanie accused me of being selfish and incapable of managing such a valuable asset. I reminded them that the will was clear and legally binding. They left angry, but I knew this was just the beginning. The next day, a formal letter arrived from Lancaster, Pruitt and Associates, Richard's lawyers. They were requesting a full accounting of all assets associated with the inheritance, and suggesting that Harold Parker had not been of sound mind when making his will. 2 days later, Stephanie and Michael showed up with a different lawyer, who specialized in family estate disputes. She presented documents suggesting that as Harold Parker's children, both Richard and Stephanie had claim to any undisclosed assets, not specifically outlined in the will. The will explicitly left the gas station and all associated assets to me, I pointed out. But your father didn't specify the mineral rights, their lawyer countered. There's precedent for separating surface property rights from subsurface mineral rights in inheritance cases. The pressure intensified over the following weeks. Richard began spreading rumors in the business community that I was mentally unstable and unable to manage my affairs. Stephanie contacted distant relatives, telling them I was trying to cheat the family out of their rightful inheritance. Then came the most disturbing discovery. Marcus overheard 2 men in suits discussing the property while filling up their car. They mentioned Maxwell Development, Marcus told me. Said something about having an inside track on acquiring the property because they had family connections. I did some digging and found that Richard had been in business with Jackson Maxwell for years. Maxwell Development had purchased 3 properties adjacent to the gas station over the past decade, all facilitated by Richard's investment firm. When confronted, Richard didn't even deny it. Maxwell is a client, yes. What of it? He's interested in developing this area, and I've helped him acquire several properties. It's just business. How long have you known about the natural gas? I demanded. Richard's hesitation told me everything. That's irrelevant now. What matters is finding a solution that benefits the entire family. I discovered later that Richard had been feeding information to Maxwell for years, including details about Dad's finances and health. He had been positioning himself to control the property after Dad's death, assuming he would inherit it as the eldest son. Stephanie's betrayal was equally calculating. Through a clerk at the county records office who owed me a favor, I learned that she had attempted to file documents claiming partial ownership of the gas station based on verbal agreements with our father. The documents included a signature that was supposed to be Dad's but didn't match his handwriting. When I confronted her, she broke down. You don't understand the pressure we're under. Michael's law firm is struggling, and we're overleveraged on the penthouse. We need this. So you tried to forge documents? I asked, incredulous. It wasn't like that, she insisted. Dad always said he wanted to take care of all of us equally. This was just correcting an oversight. The family conflict spilled over into other relationships. Richard and Stephanie contacted family friends, many of whom began calling me, urging me to do the right thing and share the wealth. My cousins took sides. Even my Aunt Gloria, Dad's sister, called to express her disappointment in my selfish behavior. I felt increasingly isolated. The only people still firmly in my corner were Marcus, who had seen firsthand how Dad had struggled while Richard and Stephanie rarely visited, and Laura from Westlake Environmental, who had witnessed Dad's careful planning. Your father anticipated this, Laura told me during a follow-up consultation. He said his older children would show their true colors if they ever discovered the gas deposits. That's partly why he kept it secret for so long. The conflict reached its peak when Richard and Stephanie filed a formal lawsuit contesting the will, claiming Dad had been unduly influenced during his final illness. The legal documents painted me as a manipulative caretaker who had taken advantage of our father's weakened state to secure the valuable property for myself. Reading those words, knowing how I had moved back home to care for Dad while they had barely visited, was the final straw. I realized that reconciliation was impossible. My siblings weren't interested in fairness. They wanted control and would say or do anything to get it. It was time to develop my own plan, not just to protect my inheritance, but to deliver a form of justice that even Dad might not have imagined. One rainy afternoon, about 2 months after taking over the gas station, an older gentleman in a fishing hat walked in, shaking water from his jacket. He looked around the store with a small smile before approaching the counter. "You must be Ethan," he said, extending his hand. "Frank Donnelly. I was a friend of your father's." The name sounded familiar. "Did you used to go fishing with him?" Frank nodded. 30 years of fishing trips. He talked about you kids all the time." He glanced around to make sure we were alone. "I hear you found what he left you. The real inheritance, so to speak." I tensed. "How do you know about that?" "Harold told me years ago. Asked me to check in on you if things got complicated after he was gone." Frank handed me a business card. "I own Donnelly Construction and Development. Been in business almost as long as your dad owned this place. I'm not here to pressure you, just to offer help if you need it." Over coffee in Dad's office, Frank revealed that my father had confided in him about the natural gas discovery more than a decade ago. "Your dad wasn't a simple man, despite what some people thought," Frank explained. "He could have cashed in years ago, retired to Florida, lived like a king. But that wasn't Harold." "Why did he keep it secret for so long?" I asked. "Multiple reasons. Initially, the extraction technology wasn't there yet, not in a way that would protect the surrounding environment. Harold was surprisingly forward-thinking about that stuff." Frank took a sip of coffee. "Then there were regulatory hurdles. But mainly, he was waiting for the right moment and the right person." "Me," I said quietly. Frank nodded. "He was disappointed in Richard and Stephanie's materialism. Said they'd turned into people who measured everything by its dollar value. He worried they'd sell to the highest bidder without caring about consequences." "That's exactly what they're trying to do now," I confirmed. "They've brought in lawyers, tried to contest the will, even attempted to forge documents." Frank wasn't surprised. "Harold predicted as much. That's why he made sure his will was ironclad. Gerald Hoffman has been his attorney for 40 years. There's no way to break that will. So what do I do now? Richard and Stephanie are making my life hell, spreading rumors, turning family against me." Frank leaned back in his chair. "What did you study in college again?" "Environmental science." "And what would you do with this land if money wasn't the primary concern?" I'd been thinking about this constantly. "I'd want to extract the resources responsibly, minimize environmental impact, and use some of the proceeds to benefit the local community." Frank smiled. "That's exactly what Harold hoped you'd say." Over the next several weeks, Frank introduced me to people who could help make that vision a reality. I met with Greenfield Energy, a company specializing in environmentally responsible natural gas extraction. Their engineers explained how modern techniques could access the deposits with minimal surface disruption. I consulted with environmental attorneys about creating legally binding agreements that would require any development to adhere to strict ecological standards. I researched community benefit agreements that would ensure a percentage of profits would go toward local improvements. Meanwhile, Gerald Hoffman helped me gather evidence of Richard's underhanded dealings with Maxwell Development and Stephanie's document forgery attempts. We compiled a comprehensive file documenting their actions since Dad's death, including recorded phone conversations where they openly discussed plans to cut me out once they gained control of the property. "Your father would be proud," Gerald told me after reviewing my plans. "He always said you had a good head on your shoulders when it came to seeing the big picture." The most unexpected ally came in the form of Jennifer, Richard's wife. She contacted me privately, asking to meet at a coffee shop far from their neighborhood. "Richard doesn't know I'm here," she said nervously. "But I can't stand what he's doing to you. It's not right." Jennifer revealed that Richard had known about the gas deposits for at least 3 years. He had seen papers on Maxwell's desk during a meeting and had been plotting ever since to ensure he would control the property after Dad died. "He was shocked when your father left it to you specifically," Jennifer explained. "He'd been assuring Maxwell that he'd deliver the property. There's a lot of money involved, Ethan. Not just from the gas, but from deals Richard has with Maxwell. Her information proved invaluable, providing details about meetings and agreements I wouldn't have otherwise known about. By the time Richard and Stephanie's lawsuit reached the preliminary hearing stage, I was fully prepared. Their attorney presented their case, claiming I had manipulated our father during his illness. My attorney countered with Dad's detailed journal entries spanning years, documenting his decision-making process long before his final illness. We presented evidence of Richard's collusion with Maxwell and Stephanie's forgery attempts. The judge dismissed their case, citing overwhelming evidence of the deceased's clear and long-standing intentions. But winning the legal battle was only the first step in my plan. I wanted to address the bigger picture, not just protecting my inheritance, but using it to create something meaningful while showing my siblings exactly who they had underestimated. I called Frank after the hearing. "I think I'm ready to move forward with the development plan we discussed." "Good," Frank said. "And what about Richard and Stephanie?" I smiled. "I've got something special in mind for them." I chose the Riverdale Community Center for our family meeting, neutral territory with plenty of space. Through Gerald, I invited Richard and Stephanie, along with their spouses, for what I described as a discussion about moving forward as a family. They arrived punctually, both couples dressed impeccably as always. Richard exuded confidence, likely assuming I'd finally seen reason and was ready to negotiate. Stephanie wore her most sympathetic expression, the one she used when trying to convince someone she had their best interests at heart. "Thank you all for coming," I began once we were seated in the private conference room I'd reserved. "After much reflection, I've decided it's time to discuss the future of Dad's property." "Finally," Richard said, barely concealing his satisfaction. "I knew you'd come around eventually. I've prepared a presentation," I continued, ignoring his comment. I connected my laptop to the projector and dimmed the lights. "This is my comprehensive development plan for the Parker Family Legacy Project." The first slide showed architectural renderings of a modern, environmentally sustainable natural gas extraction facility integrated with a revitalized gas station and community space. "I've partnered with Greenfield Energy, who specialize in minimal impact extraction," I explained, advancing through detailed slides showing the technical aspects of the project. "Their technology allows access to the natural gas deposits while disturbing less than an acre of surface land." Richard interrupted. "This all looks very professional, Ethan, but we should be discussing family ownership percentages before any plans are finalized." "I'm getting to that," I assured him, continuing my presentation. "The project includes a community benefit agreement ensuring 20% of all profits go to local environmental conservation and education programs." Stephanie frowned. 20%? That's excessive. Industry standard is more like 5%. Dad always believed in giving back, I replied simply. I advanced to the next slide, showing financial projections. The estimated total value over the life of the project is approximately $212 million. Construction begins next month. All permits have been approved, and funding is already secured. Richard sat up straighter. Funding? What funding? Who's investing? A consortium of ethical investment firms who specialize in sustainable energy projects. They've committed 100% of the necessary capital in exchange for 30% of the profits. You've already signed deals? Stephanie asked incredulously. Without consulting us? As the sole legal owner of the property, that's my prerogative. I reminded her. This is outrageous. Richard snapped. We're your family. We deserve a say in these decisions. Family? I smiled thinly. That's an interesting perspective coming from you, Richard. Perhaps this would be a good time to discuss your involvement with Maxwell Development. I switched to a news slide showing emails between Richard and Jackson Maxwell dating back 3 years. These communications reveal that you've been feeding information to Maxwell about Dad's health and finances, positioning yourself to deliver the property once Dad passed away. The color drained from Richard's face. Where did you get those? Maxwell's systems aren't as secure as they should be, I said. And it seems his assistant was quite upset about being passed over for promotion last year. I turned to Stephanie. And Stephanie, let's talk about these documents you attempted to file with the county recorder's office. I displayed scans of the forged paperwork. Falsifying legal documents is a serious offense. The district attorney was quite interested when Gerald showed these to him. Michael, Stephanie's husband, turned to her in shock. You did what? It wasn't like that, Stephanie stammered. I was just trying to protect our family interests. And then there's this, I continued, playing an audio recording. Richard and Stephanie's voices filled the room. Richard, once we get control of the property, we'll cut Ethan out completely. He doesn't deserve a penny of this windfall. Stephanie. Agreed. He can go back to his tree-hugging jobs. We'll tell him it's what Dad would have wanted. Richard. Maxwell's already agreed to the terms. We'll all make a fortune, and Ethan will never know what hit him. The recording ended, leaving a heavy silence in the room. Jennifer stared at Richard with disgust. Michael looked equally appalled at Stephanie. You were recording our private conversations? Richard finally sputtered. Only after I discovered your conspiracy, I replied. Which, incidentally, constitutes attempted fraud and conspiracy to commit fraud. Gerald has prepared detailed briefs for law enforcement should that become necessary. Are you threatening us? Stephanie asked, her voice shaking. Not at all. I'm offering you a choice. I move to the final slide of my presentation. Option 1. I pursue legal action regarding your various attempts to defraud me and damage my reputation. The evidence is substantial and would likely result in significant legal consequences, not to mention professional repercussions. I let that sink in before continuing. Option 2. We move forward with the Parker Family Legacy Project under the terms I've established. What terms? Richard asked warily. You and Stephanie each receive a 5% share in the project. Non-controlling, non-transferable interests. In exchange, you sign comprehensive legal agreements acknowledging my full ownership and relinquishing any current or future claims. 5%? Richard scoffed. That's insulting. Additionally, I continued as if he hadn't spoken, your shares are contingent on active participation in the community benefit aspects of the project. Richard, you'll serve on the board of the Environmental Education Center we're establishing. Stephanie, you'll oversee the scholarship program for local students pursuing environmental sciences. You expect us to work for our shares? Stephanie asked incredulously. Dad always said nothing worth having comes without effort, I replied. Oh, and one more condition. Both of you will need to work shifts at the gas station 1 weekend per month for the first year. That's ridiculous, Richard exploded. I'm an investment banker, not a gas pump attendant. Those are my terms. Take them or face option 1. The room fell silent as my siblings processed their options. Jennifer was the first to speak. Richard, you should take the deal, she said quietly. 5% of $200 million is still $10 million. And frankly, you're lucky Ethan isn't pressing charges. Michael nodded in agreement. Stephanie, think about this rationally. We could use that money to pay off the penthouse. Richard and Stephanie exchanged glances, their earlier confidence completely evaporated. You have until tomorrow to decide, I said, gathering my materials. Gerald will have the paperwork ready either way. As I walked out, leaving them to discuss their limited options, I felt a weight lift from my shoulders. This wasn't about revenge, though I couldn't deny a certain satisfaction. This was about honoring Dad's vision, while ensuring my siblings learn the lesson he had tried to teach them all along. True value isn't measured in dollars. 6 months after that fateful meeting at the community center, Parker's gas and service underwent a remarkable transformation. The rusting pumps had been replaced with sleek, energy-efficient models. The convenience store now featured locally sourced products, and the repair garage had been modernized with state-of-the-art equipment. Behind the property, mostly hidden from street view, construction of the extraction facility was nearly complete. True to Greenfield Energy's promise, the environmental impact had been minimal, with advanced techniques ensuring the natural gas could be accessed with little disruption to the surface. Richard and Stephanie had ultimately accepted my terms. Not out of family loyalty, but because they recognized it was their best option given the circumstances. Their participation in the project had been grudging at first, but something unexpected happened along the way. Richard lost his position at Lancaster Investment Group when news of his unethical dealings with Maxwell came to light. Maxwell himself had distanced himself completely, unwilling to be associated with the scandal. Without his high-powered job and industry connections, Richard was forced to reevaluate his priorities. "I never realized how much of my identity was tied to that job," he admitted one evening after a board meeting for the Environmental Center. "Everyone treated me differently when I had the fancy title and expense account." Stephanie's transformation had been similarly humbling. Her husband Michael had been deeply disturbed by her forgery attempt and had threatened divorce. Their marriage counselor suggested community service as a way to rebuild trust and perspective, so Stephanie had reluctantly thrown herself into the scholarship program. "These kids are incredible," she told me after interviewing applicants from the local high school. "This one girl, Alicia, reminded me of Mom, same determination, same gentle strength." I wasn't naive enough to believe my siblings had completely changed, but watching them work weekend shifts at the gas station, Richard awkwardly making change, Stephanie learning to operate the coffee machine, I saw glimpses of the people they might have been without the blinding pursuit of wealth and status. Marcus had been promoted to general manager of the station's operations, with a substantial salary increase and profit-sharing arrangement. "Your dad would be proud," he told me often. "Not just of the business, but of how you handled everything." Laura from Westlake Environmental joined our executive team, overseeing the environmental compliance aspects of the project. Her expertise proved invaluable as we navigated the complex regulations surrounding natural gas extraction. Frank Donnelly became a trusted advisor and friend. "Harold was right about you," he said during one of our fishing trips, a tradition I had decided to continue in Dad's memory. "You've found the balance between progress and preservation." The Parker Family Legacy Project quickly became a case study in responsible resource development. We hosted tours for environmental science students, showcasing how natural resources could be utilized while minimizing ecological impact. The community benefit programs funded local conservation efforts, educational initiatives, and infrastructure improvements. As for me, I found an unexpected calling as the CEO of what was now Parker Sustainable Ventures. My background in environmental science, combined with the practical business knowledge I gained through the development process, positioned me perfectly to lead the company forward. One crisp autumn day, I visited my parents' graves. I placed fresh flowers on both headstones and sat on the small bench nearby. "I think I finally understand, Dad," I said aloud. "The gas station wasn't just a business to you. It was a test, a way to see which of your children valued the right things." I told him about the project's progress, about Richard and Stephanie's gradual transformation, about the community programs that were making a real difference in people's lives. "The money doesn't matter as much as I thought it would," I confessed. "It's what we're doing with it that counts." As I sat there, I realized that Dad's true legacy wasn't the natural gas or even the business he'd built. It was the values he lived by: integrity, foresight, responsibility to community, and understanding that true wealth isn't measured in bank accounts. Richard and Stephanie were slowly learning those lessons. Their weekend shifts at the gas station had become less contentious, occasionally even enjoyable. Richard had started mentoring young entrepreneurs from disadvantaged backgrounds. Stephanie was applying her marketing skills to promote sustainable business practices. The $200 million secret beneath Dad's junk gas station had certainly changed our lives, but not in the ways any of us might have predicted. It hadn't just made us wealthy, it had made us better, or at least gave us the opportunity to become better. As I walked back to my car, I thought about how different things might have been if Dad had simply divided his assets equally among us. Richard and Stephanie would have sold to the highest bidder, the land would have been exploited without regard for environmental consequences, and we would have remained the same people we'd always been, just with more money. Instead, Dad's wisdom had created something remarkable, not just a successful business, but a chance at redemption and growth for his children. He had seen potential in all of us, even when we couldn't see it ourselves. The next day, as I worked alongside Marcus at the station, a young woman pulled up in an electric car. "Are you Ethan Parker?" she asked. "I'm in the environmental engineering program at State. We're studying your development model in my sustainable resource management class." I smiled, thinking of how Dad would have loved this moment. "I have time for a tour if you're interested," I offered. As we walked the property, I explained our approach to balancing economic development with environmental stewardship. The student took notes eagerly, asking insightful questions about our extraction methods and community programs. "Your father must be so proud," she said as we concluded the tour. "I hope so," I replied. "He taught me that success isn't just about what you have, but what you do with it." That evening, as I updated our company website, I added a simple quote to the About Us page. "True value lies beneath the surface. Bernard Harold Davis Parker." It seemed the perfect tribute to the man who had trusted me with his greatest secret and his most important lesson. What about you? Has anyone in your family ever left you something that seemed worthless at first but turned out to be valuable in unexpected ways? Or have you ever been underestimated by family members only to prove them wrong? Share your story in the comments below. Don't forget to like this video, subscribe to our channel for more real-life stories, and hit that notification bell so you never miss an upload. Thanks for watching, and remember, sometimes the most valuable inheritances aren't measured in dollars and cents, but in the wisdom and lessons they bring.